Hi there, in this video we're going to learn how to solve inequalities by addition and subtraction. So the first thing that you need to know is you need to know what these three vocabulary words are. So you should already be familiar with the word inequality. Okay, an inequality is a mathematical sentence that compares quantities. So for example, 8 is greater than 5, that's an example of an inequality. The subtraction property of inequality is the next vocabulary word that you need to know, and that is that when you subtract the same number on both sides of an inequality, the inequality remains true. Okay? There's also an addition property of inequality, which is when you add the same number on both sides of an inequality, the inequality remains true as well. Okay? So one is when you add the same number, the other is when you, the first one is when you subtract the same number. The second one is when you add the same number on both sides. Okay, to solve addition and subtraction inequalities, do what you would do if it were an equation. So first, if you remember, you want to identify your constant. So a constant is a number that is alone. So not next to a variable. Okay. And whatever the constant is, you want to do the opposite. So an example of that here, we have x plus 3 is greater than 10. You need to figure out what value of x, okay, you can plug into this inequality in order for the value on this side to be greater than the value on this side. Okay, so if we start, if we start solving, right, you want to start by identifying the constant and then doing the opposite. So my constant here is this plus 3. So instead, I'm going to do the opposite, which is subtracting 3 on both sides. If I subtract 3 on both sides, my 3's cancel out on the left, and I'm left with x is greater than 7. 10 minus 3 gets you 7. So this is what my final inequality is. So this is actually read as x is all values. Oh, I wrote less. It should be greater than. Sorry. X is all values greater than 7. Okay, so if you were to plug in any number here, you can plug in a number that is greater than 7, and it'll make this inequality true. So let's just recap. I found my constant, which I said my constant was 3. So I did the opposite, which is minus 3. So I use the subtraction property of inequality to get my x is greater than 7. Now the check here is a little bit different than equations. In equations, I would just plug in 7 and be done with it. Now though, my solution, x, is not 7. X is greater than 7. So what you have to do is you have to rewrite this whole equation, or not equation, inequality. You have to rewrite the inequality, only instead of x, you're going to plug in some number greater than 7. So I'm going to plug in 8. 8 is a number that's greater than 7. So I rewrote this whole thing, only instead of x, I plugged in a number greater than 7, which is 8. Could have plugged in 10, could have plugged in 20, whatever. Okay, 8 plus 3 gets you 11, and 11 is greater than 10, so that checks out. Okay, here are another 2 examples. So start with your constant. My constant is minus 3 in this problem, so the opposite would be to add 3 on both sides. Remember, you're doing it on both sides of the inequality symbol. Minus 3 plus 3 gets you 0. I'm left with a on the left is less than 8 plus 3, 11. So if I were to check in this problem, I'm going to plug in any number that's less than 11. So 10 is less than 11. So if I were to plug in 10 for A, I should get an inequality that's less than 8, which does check out. Okay, now let's look here. My constant is 4, so I'm going to do the opposite. And now I'm left with y is greater than or equal to 3. So any value that's greater than or equal to 3 can be plugged in here. I'm going to plug in 10. 10 is technically greater than or equal to 3. So again, this is the check. My check here, I'm going to plug in 10. It doesn't matter what number you plug in as long as it's greater than or equal to 3. So 4 plus 10 is greater than or equal to 7. Right? Again, I rewrote this here. Okay, I rewrote that here. Only instead of y, I plugged in the 10. So when you check, 4 plus 10 gets you 14, and that is greater than or equal to 7. So that does check out. Our next, I'm just going to skip, or no, I am going to go over this. This is just a recap from the last lesson, right? When the value is not included in the solution, you want to use an open circle. So whenever you have less than and greater than, when the value is included in the solution, you want to use a closed circle. So if you notice here, we have the equals at the bottom. So less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. Okay, so here's our next example. We have a plus a half is less than 2. Okay, start with your constant. Nothing different. Even though there's a fraction, there's nothing different. So our constant is 1/2. So we're going to minus 1/2 on both sides. On the left, we are left with a is less than, 2 minus a half, which just gets you 1.5. So if we were to recap here, we did the subtraction property of inequality. We subtracted the same number on both sides, right? Now when we go to check, we're going to plug in any number less than 1.5. So, I don't know, 1 is less than 1.5, right? So I'm going to plug in 1 for A. And that should get me a number less than 2, which it does. So that checks out. So now when I go to graph, 1.5 is between 1 and 2, and it's going to be an open circle because it's less than symbol, and then it's going to go to the left. Why don't you guys pause the video and try doing this one on your own right now? Try doing C on your own right now. Okay, now that you've had the opportunity to do it, why don't you check your answer with mine? You should have got h is greater than 0. So I started off with a constant, which is plus 4, and then I subtracted 4 on both sides. When I did that, these 4's, I canceled them out, and I got the h on the left to be greater than 0. For my check, I plugged in any number that was greater than 0, so I plugged in 1 instead of h. And then from there, I just solved. So when I graph, I have h is greater than 0, so it's an open circle, and then the arrow is pointing to the right. Why don't you take a few minutes now, pause the video, and try doing the next one on your own. Okay, hopefully you had the opportunity to take the time to look at that question. So if you notice, I started my constant, which is minus 6. I did the opposite, which is add 6 on both sides. And then I got x is less than or equal to 10. And then when you check, I just plugged in 0. You can plug in anything, though, that is less than or equal to 10. So when I checked my answer, it worked out. Negative 6 is less than or equal to 4. And then when you graph, it's a closed circle on the 10, and it is to the left. Watch out for part 2. I still have one more question to go over in part 2's video.